Most people have seen the photograph. A section of Apollo 13 service module is missing. Metal is peeled back. Panels are torn away. The spacecraft looks as if something reached inside and ripped it open. The image answers one question immediately. Something catastrophic happened. It refuses to answer the next one. What actually exploded? On the evening of the mission, Apollo 13 was not in trouble. The spacecraft was moving normally through space on its way toward the moon. The crew was performing routine operations. Nothing in the telemetry suggested an emergency. Then came a request to stir the oxygen tanks. Inside the service module, small fans mixed the liquid oxygen to improve measurement accuracy. It was a normal procedure. The same operation had been performed before. Seconds later, instruments across the spacecraft began changing. Warning lights appeared. Electrical readings shifted. One oxygen tank suddenly showed strange behavior. Then came the crew's famous transmission. Houston, we've had a problem. At first, nobody knew what had happened. Mission Control could see consequences, not causes. Oxygen was disappearing. Fuel cells were losing the resources they needed to generate electricity. Systems that should have remained stable were becoming unstable. Somewhere inside the spacecraft, something had failed. The damaged service module would not be photographed until much later. For now, investigators had only streams of numbers arriving from hundreds of thousands of miles away. Those numbers began narrowing the mystery. The evidence repeatedly pointed toward one component. Oxygen tank number 2. Pressure readings from that tank collapsed. Other systems reacted as if the tank had suffered a major internal failure. As engineers reconstructed the sequence, a temporary answer emerged. The tank exploded. It felt like a complete explanation. Telemetry supported it. The visible damage supported it. The mission had lost oxygen, electrical power, and part of the spacecraft structure. A tank explosion seemed capable of explaining all of it. For a time, that answer held. Then the tank's history began to matter. Long before Apollo 13 launched, the oxygen tank had experienced unusual problems during ground operations. Records showed that emptying the tank during a countdown demonstration test had not gone as expected. The oxygen would not drain normally. The event seemed minor. The mission launched anyway. Yet investigators kept returning to those records. A strange pattern was emerging. If the explosion had truly begun during flight, why was so much attention being drawn backward toward events that happened before launch? The further investigators looked into the tank's past, the less comfortable the simple explanation became. Years earlier, the tank had been removed and reinstalled during spacecraft preparation. During handling, it had experienced an incident that likely damaged part of its internal plumbing. The damage did not destroy the tank. The tank continued operating. That fact made the problem harder to see. Nothing obvious was broken. Nothing dramatic happened. Instead, a vulnerability remained hidden inside a system everyone trusted. When technicians later struggled to empty the tank during testing, they used its internal heaters to boil off the remaining oxygen. The procedure appeared routine. The consequences were not. Inside the tank were thermostatic switches designed to protect the heating system from excessive temperatures. Under normal spacecraft conditions, those switches were expected to open before dangerous overheating occurred. The protection system existed. The question was whether it actually protected anything. Investigators eventually discovered a detail buried inside design assumptions. The spacecraft operated on 28-volt electrical power. Ground testing equipment could use a much higher voltage. The thermostatic switches had been designed around one environment and exposed to another. During the lengthy heating operation, the switches likely opened and closed repeatedly under conditions they had never been intended to handle. Eventually, evidence suggested they welded themselves shut. Nothing outside the tank announced this failure. No alarm sounded. No dramatic event occurred. The safety system simply stopped being a safety system. With the switches no longer interrupting power, temperatures inside the tank could rise far beyond the levels engineers believed were possible. The accepted explanation began to collapse. This was no longer a story about a tank randomly failing in space. It was becoming a story about hidden damage, hidden overheating, and a protection system that quietly disappeared. Yet another question remained. If the tank had been damaged before launch and overheated before launch, why did the catastrophe wait until the mission was already underway? The answer required returning to the moment everyone remembered. The fans stir. Investigators reconstructed what likely existed inside the tank after the overheating event. Electrical wiring was insulated with Teflon. Under extreme temperatures, that insulation could become damaged. The damage remained invisible. The spacecraft launched. The mission proceeded normally. The vulnerability traveled to the moon inside the spacecraft. Then, during the routine tank stir, electrical components activated inside an environment rich in oxygen. A short circuit became possible. Damaged insulation provided the missing path. Combustion followed. Pressure rose rapidly. The tank ruptured. The force tore through surrounding structure. Oxygen escaped into space. Fuel cells began dying. Telemetry started recording the consequences that mission control would spend years trying to explain. The explosion had occurred during flight. But the disaster had not truly begun there. That distinction changed everything. Investigators never recovered a neat collection of surviving hardware that could tell the whole story. Much of the evidence had been destroyed or remained inaccessible. Instead, they assembled the chain from telemetry, testing records, engineering reviews, demonstrations, and reconstruction. One explanation after another failed. A tank exploded. Yes. But why? Because a short circuit likely occurred. Why? Because insulation had been damaged. Why? Because overheating likely occurred. Why? Because a protection system stopped protecting. Why? Because assumptions built into earlier design and testing conditions allowed a hidden vulnerability to survive. The famous photograph of Apollo 13's torn service module still shows the wound. The missing panels still prove that something exploded. Yet the image means something different once the investigation is complete. It is no longer a picture of a sudden accident. It is a photograph of accumulated history. The explosion everyone remembers was merely the moment the hidden chain finally became visible. And that discovery changed NASA's designs, procedures, and review processes, because Apollo 13 revealed something larger than a damaged spacecraft. A catastrophe can begin years before the sound of the explosion.